so important, and I think most people forget that, and they just do it because they think they can make some money, and that always ends in tears.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. I have Simon Penson here today. Going to be talking a lot about scaling, and his organization scaled multiple exits in the agency space, helps groups on the B2B side, and ultimately grow private equity. So a lot of different things in common here, and you're going to hear the exact formula Simon used to grow and exit his organizations. Simon, thanks for taking the time to join us here on the podcast.
No, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And you're over in London, we're in Los Angeles. Where did your career start? Where did the journey begin to get you to where you are today?
That's a good starting question. And yeah, we are. It's the miracles of technology that, it's the end of my day and the beginning of yours, right? So hopefully the lighting's all right. But good question. I was lucky because I was born into the working world in the late 90s. So obviously there's only so much you can do about becoming sort of 18, working age in the late 90s. That has to be down to luck and birth, right? But I came into the working world as the internet was just becoming a thing. And so I've kind of lived my whole professional life through the evolution of that, which has been, helpful, challenging at times, created lots of opportunity, so I've definitely been in the right place in the right time from that perspective. But actually, originally, I was a journalist. So I trained as a journalist, obviously went to school, did the normal stuff, trained as a journalist, always had a passion for words and writing, and had done some work experience around that, and then actually went to work for a series of newspaper groups. So this was obviously because very late 90s, the internet was certainly not a commercial thing. Print media was still where the opportunity was. And so went into that space. But equally, I started in the evenings kind of working out that this internet thing was interesting, and started playing around with, really early versions of websites, built in Dreamweaver and Joomla and, all of these things that have long been forgotten. And sort of did that started that process in the late 90s. And by sort of 2007, though that experiment had become a full-time job. So I left 10 years of corporate journalism behind because I built a small group of content affiliate sites, as we would now know them. Mm-hmm. About niche subjects, everything from kitchens to divorce to all sorts of different spaces, cosmetic surgery, and those sites became a business that paid the bills, left the corporate world behind, ran those businesses full time for about 18 months, and then ended up that group of sites was acquired. It wasn't a big exit, but I guess you claim them all, don't you? And then what that had taught me, though, most importantly, is how to build audience online at the time. And this is 2008, 2009. So you have to picture the position that the internet still even then looked different. Facebook was around, but it wasn't a commercial behemoth that it is now. So social was just coming in. Websites were still relatively straightforward. People weren't really investing in digital. They were doing stuff, but they weren't taking it seriously. So really different place. But because of where I'd come from in content, my view was that, that had to have a big part in the rest of, its evolution. And so launched what ultimately started life as a content marketing agency as we would know it. And grew really slowly, started that in 2009, grew really slowly to begin with because we were having to do a lot of education and thought leadership in the market. And educating and taking people along the journey as to why they should invest. But then obviously over time, the market crept up to us and then caught up with us. And then we started growing really quickly. And, long story short, we sold to Interpublic, one of the big advertising kind of marketing holdcos, in 2016. And we had a long earn out. We grew really significantly through that process. Last year of that earn out was 2020. And so 2020 year, we ended up and I don't know to be exact, but somewhere between 250 and 300 people, kind of headcount business. So a really kind of solid, very much a scale business. And then sort of concurrently to that, I'd started angel investing because I'd started to see some money from building that business, started angel investing into tech and the SaaS, because back in 2015, that to me felt like the next iteration of the internet. So a little bit like websites did in the late 90s. And for me, the best way of learning about it was to sort of, really throw myself into that world, that ecosystem, and start investing in it. And I think through doing that, I realized pretty quickly that, founders of those type of businesses are often brilliant product people, brilliant engineers, but haven't necessarily run or scaled a business before. And this kind of realization was a big aha moment for me, because I realized that actually throwing money at these type of businesses, yes, it's helpful to a degree, but in the end, it becomes as much of a problem as it does a solution, because you raise the money, what do you do with it? And there's a lot of wastage and all that kind of stuff. They fall down the same holes as, I did, and all that kind of stuff. So I started smoothing that path out. And long story short, I met 3 other people that kind of shared the same worldview, and started investing money together. And in 2018, we formed an early stage VC fund in the UK that invests in sort of, like pre-seed, basically, with the view that, we would, would not just invest money, but we would, as all of us great, very experienced entrepreneurs, would then really help these businesses grow. And so that was really the reason I mentioned that as much as anything, is because when I left the agency business behind, really threw myself into that process of helping and supporting those founders. And it did a couple of things for me. One, it was like really validating for the lessons that I'd learned myself. So well, actually, you've got this problem. It's not such a problem, because actually I came across this at this stage, and this is what we did, and this is what happened. Mm-hmm. Of course, you start layering that up, and you see more and more people experiences the same things, and you learn quite quickly, how to solve that problem much more easily for them, so they don't fall down those holes. And because I was doing that, I really, really enjoyed it, and it became very much a purpose-based thing, which is important once you've exited and you've had a good exit, to find purpose quickly. And I really found helping those people, right? And that's what I've been doing ever since, really, in various guises. So that kind of, brings us up to present day.
Love it. So you get involved in digital, late 90s, wild, wild west. People are doing it, but not exactly doing it, taking it seriously. You're a content creator, as we would say today. You're a journalist and working for newspapers, or I guess print at that point, and then getting into digital, and then see a path of, hey, instead of just writing the content, I could use it to directly sell product, get involved in various industries as an affiliate, have an exit there. You then create a content agency because you see the impact content can have. Grow it, sell it, 2016, stay on board till 2020, or 250, 300 different team members at that point, and say, hey, I'm going to start angel investing. I'm going to reinvest some of this capital and around an ecosystem that I know. And as you get involved there, you're saying, hey, I'm able to help founders directly. Same holes. Let me give you a smoother path. I could see what's going to happen down the road here, and then meet others who want to get involved in this. You guys create a fund, you have more capital to put in, but it sounds like it's the actual guidance that's making the difference, and somewhere for you to have purpose.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary, much better than I explained it, and much shorter. So I'll remember that version next time.
just like to paraphrase, make sure I'm getting it correctly, and working with founders, that's something we have in common. It's a passion of mine as well. I don't have the exits. You're probably able to see things from 7 different angles that I may not even be, aware of. My focus is on the marketing. What are you looking for when you're speaking to a founder? What stage company are you typically getting involved with? And where do you find you can be of the most impact for them?
I think that has evolved over time, and I think you worked with hundreds probably, because I mean, the investment funds at the time that I stepped away, actually, because I stepped away last year, has had over 100 investments, right? So, you're sitting across, not all the time, but you have visibility across 100 different businesses. And obviously you have to, like kind of productize the approach there a little bit, because otherwise, how do you help 100? You can't. And, so I had the ability to kind of learn really quickly through that process. And then more latterly kind of getting much more deeply involved in fewer businesses as well, and slightly later stage, I would say. So then it was about, like literally often first money in, so very early, and now more so where there's at least a good sense of product market fit and thing. The challenge is scaling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than starting, the challenge is scaling. I think that's probably the best way of describing it. So from a tech SaaS business perspective, you definitely got sight of 1 million ARR if you're not already there. But you could be much further on, sort of that 1 to 20 million ARR kind of pocket, I would say. And then on the kind of the kind of the more professional services side, obviously they're often not funded. So they have to be cash generative, and usually get involved business that's kind of anywhere from like 500,000 in EBITDA to, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 million EBITDA business. So, there's kind of the journey that we went on in that sector, really, because we ended up, kind of about there, perhaps slightly north of there from an EBITDA perspective. So, it's like, it's where I have the most lived experiences, where you can often add the most value, of course, really. So yeah, try and focus on that.
So want to talk about the service businesses for a moment. You said about 500,000 to 6, maybe 8 million EBITDA. So with the SaaS companies, we're looking more annual recurring revenue, but looking at the EBITDA, after everything's taken out for the most part.
Yeah.
What are the hurdles that stop groups from, let's say, 2-3 million in EBITDA up to that 5, 6, 8 amount? I know a lot of groups get stuck around there.
Yeah.
What are you typically seeing, and what do you recommend for them to be able to not get in the way of their own growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting stage, because I always talk about the fact that there are very clear, often glass ceilings at those various stages, and I think there's a glass ceiling at certainly at like a roughly, like broad numbers, but 1 million EBITDA. Then there's probably another one at 2 to 3 million, I would say. And a lot of it comes down to, at that kind of second stage, really, it's about making sure that you really truly have really good organizational structure with experienced people at the top end, right? Because it's that normal thing. What got you to here won't necessarily get you to there, and it was a tough realization in our own journey to realize that. And actually bringing in like proper, like, I don't want to say corporate professionals, but people that have really run scaled businesses before is really important, because it's much more about allowing the specialists to lead. It's about creating really good reporting mechanisms for operational BI and financial BI, and all of the having the levers to be able to understand what you should be pushing and pulling to make the differences. So really maturing kind of reporting and KPIs and metrics and all of that kind of stuff. Having the senior team to know what to do with it. And I always talk about 3 generals. So, in service-based businesses. So, obviously having your CEO, but then having a COO or, commercial director, operations director or whatever. So somebody on operations, somebody on sales, and then somebody in finance at that level. I think it's really important to have really good people in those 3 seats around the CEO. So I often do a lot of people work around that, and obviously then the organizational structure and design stuff that comes from that, and how they cascade down responsibility and accountability. And then the other part of it is then really about maturing kind of sales and marketing function and making sure that scales with the organization, because obviously by that point you've got a lot of mouths to feed. Keeps you awake at night, that's for sure. Oh, yeah. And so you need a really robust process for driving new leads and opportunity.
What worked for you? I'm an agency owner. you had at the end, 2020, about 10 times the amount of employees that we do.
Yeah.
We have an effective model. It works for our industry, have real talent. I know you emphasize people, and even talking about bringing in more experienced people. What made the difference from you? How were you able to get from, 25, 50 employees up to these larger amounts? What made you stand out from other agencies out there? There's thousands and going after the same clients in some cases. What allowed you guys to have leaps and bounds and take on more of a market share in the space that you were transacting in?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And I think about this a lot because you're right. It is increasingly the agency space is ultra competitive. As they say, that, an agency is the easiest business to start and the hardest to scale for that reason, because there are very few barriers to entry. And, like, how do you differentiate? There was undoubtedly, in our case, some luck because, we were in the right place at the right time, i.e. I knew about content. I felt that looked important to the internet, but nobody was doing it. So that was luck in as well as judgment. But then we built a really good go-to-market around that. So I think that's great. So proposition and differentiation, developed through good go-to-market, really important. So you can really talk to that visceral pain in the present to your potential clients. And tell that narrative and believe it, and have a really good culture. So then build really good culture behind it, so people early on understand that you're truly mission led and what that mission is, and you're talking about it really consistently. So you create a pool of evangelists that really want to go with you, and they're going to work harder than they probably should, or they're being paid to work to drive you initially, because it just requires blood, sweat, and tears to begin with. Then it was about really establishing brand, and we did that through thought leadership. So like proving that we were good at what we did and told everybody about it everywhere that we possibly could. And then, once you get to that kind of stage, you develop some kind of brand. I mean, actually, funnily enough, you can't read it on the wall behind me, but this was up in our old office and has since kind of come back into my home office, in that it kind of talks about how you build really valuable businesses. You kind of become the best in the world at doing one thing, which is exactly what we did. Then over time you build some brand. You have brand effect. You have a little bit some scale effect, because obviously the bigger you get, the more right you have to win bigger things, and that becomes self-fulfilling. Technology advantages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they basically, over time, then that allows you to widen the aperture of what you did, which is what we did. So once you become the best in the world at one thing, and those things start to take effect, and you have a bit of a network effect, then actually we started then broadening our service offering. And that's the bit that really made the difference between, going back to that, how do you get from 2 million EBITDA to wherever? It's really about having more stuff to sell, and then having a really good client service function to be able to sell it at scale. And that actually, interestingly, was probably one of the hardest things that we did. We had some very dark days scratching our heads around that, and had to kind of make our almost our entire kind of CS function redundant on a couple of different occasions, because we got it wrong, which is an awful thing to do, because you're dealing with people's lives, aren't you? But making sure that there was a real kind of commercial edge to that team was really important, and that they were looking kind of consultatively at how to solve client problems and sell them more things.
It's really stood out to me in our conversations when you talk about client services, cross-selling, as you're widening your products. I could tell you, working with a lot of groups on investment crowd funds, they're shorter term initiatives. And the idea of being able to work with groups for longer engagements, renewing partnerships, and being able to have that go on for several years, or let's call it 6 months to multiple years, versus a few months to a year, can make all the difference towards growth and scaling. And like you mentioned, that it was difficult to put into place, but once it worked, and made all the difference for you.
Yeah, that's right. It's really difficult, but in the end, it gets you there. Because, actually, if you look at it pretty logically and objectively, if you've got more things to sell, you can generally sell more things to them. And therefore, the average kind of, lifetime value of a client goes up. And, as long as your churn rate's not too bad on the other side, your attrition rate's not too bad, depending on the parlance that you're using, then you keep adding them slowly here and then upselling them here. It lifts the whole boat, doesn't it?
When I look at the success rates of startups, and I understand you work with companies that are further along, they have aspects of their model that are proven. But when I look at the success rates of startups, they're not good. The amount of companies that survive a year, the ones that make it through 5 years, you're talking about the different hurdles in terms of ARR, in terms of EBITDA that they have to get past. And I know it's not 100% success rate, not speaking to your projects, but just looking across all the groups that are trying to go down that path.
Yeah.
How are you effective at this? How do you identify which groups you want to work with? Are there any different attributes of founders or of, C-suite teams that are able to be the ones that make it through? I know there's a lot of information out there that, founders can download and put into their own activities. I know there's a lot of consultants out there. What's made your approach so effective? And I ask because I know it's very difficult. And in my experience, again, I don't know all the groups in London, but in my experience, it's not 100%. What has made your work so productive?
Yeah, it's a good observation and a good question. And I think what I've come to realize, and it's taken me some time, even though I have it, is the fact that lived experience is the most valuable commodity there is, I think. And I think that's true of life as much as it is true about business, right? I think and I've always realized that to a degree. I was always the person, I think, that realized that actually, the old lady or the old man in the corner was probably the most interesting person to speak to, because they have wisdom, right? They've been there, they've seen it. And actually, most stuff is not new. It's been seen before. And that's true of politics or history or whatever. And it is true about business. And I was very fortunate to have a really, really good mentor who became a non-exec for us through our business thing. So I kind of had that reflected back at me as well through our journey. And by the way, I had no doubt that we'd never have got as far as we did without having that external validation and that external support. Because again, they had the lived experience to prevent us from falling over and to give us the confidence and the accountability and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's probably another reason why I'm so passionate about it. And then I think it's the utilization of that combination of listening, so 2 ears and 1 mouth, to the actual realities of that specific business, because every business is slightly different. I'm a great non-believer in this kind of productized approach to consulting, where people go, well, you can follow our TYX thing that takes you on a 20-step plan and all that kind of stuff. And everybody has to follow it because every business is different. And I think you can only treat every business differently once you've got lived experience, because you're then not following a formulaic thing. You're actually listening to the business, overlaying lived experience with, yes, absolutely, strategic consulting now, to then go, okay, so therefore the prioritization approach that we take should look like this. So we should attack these working on the business projects in this order, given who you are, what your team looks like, what scale you're at, to be able to, to do those things. Because in the end, every business completes all of those key working on the business projects, but it's critically the order they do it in and how effectively they are executing. Mm-hmm. So, while I say we work generally with businesses in this kind of order, there are exceptions to that. We work with businesses that are earlier. We work with businesses that are sometimes later. And a lot of that evaluation comes back to the fact that, we're looking for founders that have not necessarily life experience, although that can be helpful, but critically the ability to understand the value of external support, and not just, having read about it and thought that it was a good idea, but really truly understanding that lived experience is the most valuable thing that you can have, and that you're willing, ready to listen and to actually implement the changes that are suggested to you. Because obviously we can take, as consultants, can take horses to water, but can't necessarily make them drink, right? So the ability to execute and listen to advice, I think, is really key. And then, we also like market segment and, quality of product and all of those things are important because, we can't affect that. That's the business that you have. And equally, I'm a finite resource, right? I hopefully explain that I'm doing it for, the reasons of purpose and mission, really, to kind of take a little bit more of that pain away rather than having to do it. And so try and really be careful about who we try and help, really honestly, because we want to affect real change. And so if you're in a market that we're like, this is going to be really hard, it's hugely competitive, or it's on the decline, and from a macro perspective, then, we'll be really honest and say we're probably not the right partners for you. But, where we see that you're in a growing market, great total addressable market size, perhaps you look like a great founder, there's defensibility here, all the kind of really good important tick boxes, then, that's where we kind of really like to jump in.
Makes sense. Can agree with many of those statements. I couldn't agree with it more. I like to say expertise, you're able to see things before they happen.
Yeah, that's true. That's exactly it.
You can almost feel it. Hey, you're probably going to start encountering these issues. And even if you don't, at least we're making these preparations so you have a stronger, likelihood of hitting the next milestones and quicker at that. I like how you guys determine the right different verticals to play in and how you're looking at the founder, how you're looking at the processes. That makes perfect sense and must be a lot of fun, looking at growth stage companies and determining which ones you're going to add your resources to and take to the next levels.
Yeah, and look, we definitely not got it right all the time. That's for sure. I mean, early on, I've backed, physically with my own money as well as my own time. I've backed, plenty of failures as well. But that's, how do you learn? You have to learn from. That's the process that you learn from, isn't it? You don't really learn from the successes, as the cliche goes. So, yeah, definitely not got it right all the time. But that's there are some painful stories there as well.
Sure. I mean, looking at high risk, high return sections of a portfolio for investing, if you're getting 1 out of 10 to land and hit the next levels, and with the type of growth that could occur at that section of the portfolio, you're doing great, and it pays for all the others. So if you guys have 1 out of 3, and just throwing random numbers out there, you're still, light years ahead of what other investors are seeing. If it's even greater than that, hey, you're leaving the competition behind there. And what I say when I'm working with, let's say, a startup and on a capital raise and using digital marketing, I want to give them the best shot at success they can get. I want to bring historical equity crowdfunding investors to the deal. I want to use similar types of content, formulas, content calendars to be able to engage those audiences to higher conversion rates. So even just having that opportunity and the right team, you emphasized how important the individuals who are involved are on their side.
Yeah, I think you're right, and you're going to see them at a really early stage, aren't you? When they're looking at those kind of funding avenues, and interestingly, I think that what you're doing is smart from a couple of perspectives, actually. Because one, I think from an observational perspective, if I look at the agency space, the one thing that I think has happened over the last couple of years is that the specialists are winning.
Yes.
So, whereas even when we built our agency business, specialism meant, you did PPC, paid search, whatever. Now it's really as much about actually, yes, you do PPC, paid search, but you do it for a very specific sector as well. Mm-hmm. So that go-to-market approach, the people that are doing that are definitely winning because they cut through their message, their narrative cuts through to the visceral specific pain. So I think that's really good. And then obviously, from the other side is that I've seen it from sat as the funder, I've seen it how difficult it is sometimes to one for them for like when you've got a good idea, you don't necessarily know anything about that world. So where do you start? And like so many businesses have gone, oh, I wish we knew that, this fund existed earlier because, it would have made our life much easier. But we've spent 6, 12 months trying to figure out this market out. So having the ability to cut that time down, I think is really, really good. And there should be more of that in the UK as well, actually.
Yeah, we really fell into this space and authentically in the sense that the clients we were servicing were always talking about fundraising. Hey, can you
Yeah.
work on the marketing section of our business plan? I need to present it to investor, or pitch deck for the same reasons, or first campaign to later be scaled with capital once effective. Can you even participate in that investor meeting for us? You do a great job of explaining it. This was a common conversation for us. And once I was introduced to, here in the US, Regulation D 506C, allowing us to target accredited investors, I saw, hey, we can really, play a role in this. My background's in ad tech. I could layer on top household income, net worth data to reach the right audiences and bring them to these deals. And we saw success. We were introduced to more groups. We were introduced to groups in reward crowdfunding for a bit. And then the laws for equity crowdfunding allowing for retail investors came into play. And we had ads live day one and just more and more and more introductions as it was all working. There are downsides as an agency to the space, and I speak about these transparently, even mention, shorter term engagements, smaller budgets,
Yeah.
earlier stage founders can lead to this element of we have to always be educating and have to go deeper, even into the acronyms involved, the KPIs, the key performance indicators involved. It's different than working with the group that's spending millions a month on ads and has been in the weeds for years. But that being said, it's very exciting. It's very rewarding. We're directly part of our clients' growth. In my earlier days, I was working with Fortune 500s and one of hundreds of vendors in some cases. Here, we're watching their team, their office, their product evolve in real time, and have become a go-to group for it. I'm part of the professional associations for it. It's really helped us with positioning. We're not one of even a dozen other companies trying to get the business for a subscription service or some type of e-com product. We're being brought in as the guys who do. We've worked on over 500 deals. And part of streamlining the process, you had talked about, hey, instead of 6 to 12 months, you could do it much quicker, which is crucial for the groups we work with. They have a limited amount of time, but we also have shared resources in terms of audience data. So we've done massive data mining projects to bring in a very finite list of investors that are highly active in this space and can reach them. It would take an issuer, a group issuing shares, years to even think of it in many cases, let alone actually build it to the size we have. So, that's available for the groups that come through. And I stand behind, identifying a niche and, standing out from there.
Yeah. No, I can see it's a smart play, and like you say, there's a need for it, right? Because it's very difficult if you don't know the market. So,
Now, Simon, I like to ask questions to, package actionable insights for the audience here. And they're, of course, around the title of the show. I look at marketing as a series of tests and marketing as a function towards growth. So this isn't a marketing specific question, but, in path to becoming a larger organization, what should marketers who are tuned in be testing towards their own operating procedures? What will allow them to see big jumps in terms of the reporting numbers?
so you're talking about from a revenue generation perspective,
Yeah.
revenue question. Yeah. I think I think we touched on it actually in that, that question always should start with go-to-market. And I think having a proper understanding of what who it is that you should be properly targeting, why, and what that visceral pain is, and everybody pretends that they have a really good view of that. But when I actually really dig into that, and, we're saying, well, when was the last time you interviewed prospects and, like ICP and all of that kind of good stuff? And the answer is probably never. So actually starting there and spending a lot of time and effort actually doing that process really well is critical, and the amount of times that we've, supported clients through that process and they come out the other end and going, God, I wish we'd done this before, because we've learned so much. And actually this bit is really interesting, that kind of stuff. I think all revenue generation starts with like staying close to your customer, right, and really understanding them and what pain it is that they solve, because that's all their business is. It's it's a collection of people surrounding a problem that you need to solve, or an inefficiency you need to solve. And so, like, truly understanding that is key, because once you've got that, you can then build really good proposition and messaging that talks to that. You can design service or product roadmap that develops around that and answers those questions. And you can build a sales and marketing plan that's really laser focused. And, because obviously, like, often sales and marketing now should and could and can start with kind of content ideation, because, that's kind of what you want to be doing, really, particularly in B2B, at least. If you know your customer and you know the pains, it's much easier to run ideation and create thought leadership and create lead magnets or whatever it is that you're doing if you know the customer well enough. So I think that is a really fundamental thing that time and time again I see people missing.
What do those interviews with prospects entail?
It's very structured. So, I mean, we've developed a kind of an ICP interview template over the years, but what you're trying to do is answer a series of questions with those kind of ideal customer profiles. So that they can be existing clients or customers, but they can and should also be like, if in an ideal world, who would our perfect customer or our perfect client be? What do they look like? And then going out to them, and you can incentivize them to spend some time, because, you probably want 45 minutes with them, by saying things like, go and, we'll put £50 or $50 towards a charity of your choice if you want to, if you'll do this for us. And it's spending 45 minutes asking them questions around, what it is that they do, who they work with at the moment, what the priorities are for the business, a long series of questions where you're asking and then listening and recording. And often the greatest value is the stuff that's said in between the questions, almost, because what you're trying to do is elicit a really open conversation around their market and their experience of the market and their experience of their day to day. And then you're trying to look for those really interesting, we really struggle to do this, or at the moment we really want to do this and we don't know how. That kind of thing. That's what you're looking for.
I love that. And it's something we don't do. I'm going to be sharing that note with the team for sure. What about optimization? So let's say, GDM's put together ICP, you've done some interviews, what you've implemented is working or it's not working. How do you optimize from there? How do you improve it? I like to focus the question more on the scenario where it's not working, but even when it is, you still want to, polish it up before really taking it to the next levels of scale. What has been your vision, your perspective in terms of how to optimize?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that comes back to, how good your measurement is, right? I think because you need to create the ability to create that feedback loop. And earlier today I was talking to a digital product business, and talking about the importance of doing things like getting your customer success team, or your AEs or whatever it is, to actually be part of the product conversations, because they're the people talking most regularly to the customer and or the client. Same with client services if you're an agency or a service business. And so they understand what they're struggling with the most. And so they often have the most visceral, clean understanding of real time what the problem is. And so getting them into that feedback loop, obviously measuring all of your KPIs and all that kind of stuff to go, so if you're a product business, how much time are they using it? How often they're using it? All the kind of key things. And like looking to optimize those things and say, how do we get them to do more and less? And, is there an efficiency in that? Is it quality time, or is the reason why that time in product has gone up is because they're struggling with something. Your people that you're talking to, your customers, will know that qualitative information. So then hooking them into that kind of cyclical process of going, right, okay, so how do we improve product or service? Okay, or an innovation. Great. What are the customers saying? Well, obviously we've done ICP interviews over here. What are customers saying on a real-time basis? How do we prioritize how we improve that service or product, and just continually going around that circle and making sure that's consistent.
Consistent, almost never ending. And I find the groups that are the most effective at optimizing have the most consistent, dependable growth. I've watched organizations that you said getting lucky earlier, but let's say getting lucky with, a layer one, version one product offering, and then did not have the ability to really evolve with the space or even later stages of growth. So the better you are at optimizing, the better you're going to be at.
Yeah, and
you're results.
You're only ever as good as your data, aren't you? And I think, attribution continues to be a problem. It's been a problem for, the entirety of the time that I've been in digital, right? So you're always fighting that battle, and increasingly, CRM data is becoming an important part of that as well, and how you enrich that and all that kind of stuff. There's always something to do.
I like how you pointed that out. I remember after the iOS 14.5 updates in 2022, groups saying, oh, you can't track anything on digital now, at least with iOS, mobile iPhone users becoming a lot more of a gray audience, not being able to see as much of what was occurring. And I said, it was never perfect. I remember, upper funnel metrics being reported in mobile advertising in the early days of mobile. There's always been holes, and there's storytelling that's an aspect of it, and it all comes down to what changes can you make that are going to produce better results next week. And when you're able to measure the optimizations in that fashion, you're basing it on actual tangibles, like you said, the right measurements. It makes all the difference.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that's why that sort of first party data and, CRM and all of those kind of good things are becoming front and center, aren't they? Because it gives you a bit of that.
Now, scale. It's one of my favorite words. Maybe that's how, we have our synergy and First Connected. It's what everyone wants to know, sometimes to a fault, but how do you scale? I know this is something you answer again and again, and I've already given us so many different tips on bringing in the right team members, changing up the processes, putting an emphasis on client service, putting an emphasis on, cross-selling, and really using those interviews to improve what you're doing, not just talk about how great you are all the time. But, if you're asked walking down the street tomorrow, how do you scale? Any tips, any examples, just focus on some cases if you like. Yeah.
That's quite a big question. And we've covered quite a lot of that, but I think, I'm a believer in fundamentals and first principles and stuff. And I think, I think you need to understand what success looks like. So, I spend quite a lot of time with clients on this to begin with, because success looks different to everyone, and there is no right or wrong answer. So when you talk about scale, what do you really mean by scale? Some people want to build, the next unicorn, and other people are happy with 10 people and, a really nice lifestyle business. So, it starts with actually know what you're optimizing for, because obviously the pathway to that looks really different, and the prioritization of the things that you therefore work on look really different. So I think that's really important. And then, the key thing is that, it always comes down to people in the end, even as a product business, actually. It always comes down to the people aspects. And I think you come from a realization of, like when you start a business, often you'll be the person doing everything. So, in the place of a product or a SaaS business, you're physically building the product, and you're trying to do some marketing, and, you're organizing finances. And, if you're in an agency business, it's, no different. You're doing the client work and you're billing them and next for everything else. And so you start off with doing that, and then you might hire one or two generalists around you to go, right, if I could carbon copy me a little bit and have two or three of us, that'd be better. Then, of course, you start the process of specialization. So then you start hiring specialists to do specialist things, and that gets you to a certain point. and each one of these stages, by the way, becomes increasingly more difficult, which is, like somebody once described it to me as a hurdle race where the hurdles get bigger each time. And you've got to decide whether you're willing to make the sacrifices and everything that goes with it to get over that next hurdle. Because you can if you want to, but this is the cost of doing so. And then it's the specialists have to lead. And, that is a long, that's probably the longest, most difficult part of the process in that, because then you go through several stages, as we talked about earlier, of realizing that you've got the specialists to lead, but then you need new specialists that have different set of skills to lead them, and et cetera, et cetera. So, I would say think about first and foremost, like, what is it that you want? I think, and really make sure you understand that and get it, and make sure that it's backed by a really clear why, a belief system, because that means that you'll keep going for long enough, because it's a very difficult process. Keep going for long enough to do it. So, from a first principles perspective, I think that's a really good place to start.
That why, it's really going to matter on those tough days, tough weeks, tough months, and reminding yourself and having the vision of where it's going, like you said, what does success look like, and just being committed with grit, no matter what, hitting those levels. Yeah.
It's so important. And I think most people forget that, and they just do it because they think they can make some money. And that always ends in tears. You have to believe in it. Like the reason why I'm doing this now is because, so if I can get up every day and I can make that trip, that process just a little bit easier for somebody, and take a little bit of that pain away, then I've had a good day. And that stays with you irrespective of what happens around you. And that's a belief system that, I have. So, that is strong enough to, can allow you to do it consistently for not weeks, not months, but years.
Well, there it is. Simon, you've done this successfully, more than most people ever have, ever will. For you to come on the podcast and share what you've seen work, the commonalities, I almost feel like, this is what the path looks like for you discussion for me, where you've done this, you've grown agencies, you've been able to now focus and find your purpose, and even hearing that, hey, this is my why, this is why I get up in the morning, this is why I love it, this is why I do it, this is why it's fulfilling. It's somewhere, it's a path I would like to go down. So I feel like I'm getting the framework here, even just in this discussion. I want to thank you for coming on and taking the time to do this and share your wisdom.
No, thank you. Really, really enjoyed it. And as I said, I do it because, as I'm reflecting to you, I had it reflected to me and with an advisor, and, I know the value of it. So as I said, if a little bit of this helps someone, then it's been a good day. So no, thank you.
Well, you're wrapping up your day in London. You've helped me, so I hope that adds to your evening there. But I want to give you the opportunity to add anything else. Any final notes you want to leave the audience with, and where can they go to learn more?
Sure. Well, look, as I said, I do this because, I'm passionate about it. So, and I have lots of conversations with people just to try and help. So if anybody, out there kind of has a specific question, find me on LinkedIn, Simon Penson, Penson, as you can see on the screen, simon@scaled.co.uk as well. They're probably the two easiest ways to reach me. And, I'm always happy to try and help. So hopefully that's helpful.
And highly recommend that you do take Simon up on that offer. Simon, thanks again. This has been great. I've really enjoyed the discussion. Appreciate you making the time to do this.
Amazing. Thank you for organizing.
And thank you, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next time. Take care.